When it comes to paintbrushes, there's so much choice. So I've put together a guide to the hair type and brush shape to use for what purpose. So first I'm going to start with the paintbrush hair type. So when I reach to pick a brush, I'm going to first be thinking about what stage of the painting am I on. For the underpainting stages, I'm usually using much broader strokes. I'm filling in big areas, and my brush action is going to be a lot more kinetic and abrasive against the canvas. So for that reason, I'm going to pick a thicker and more durable brush like bristle. Bristle brushes are made from hair from a pig or hog, and they're really the go-to brush type for oil painting. But if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, then you're going to want to select a good quality synthetic bristle brush. Synthetic brushes are man-made out of either nylon or polyester filament, and they offer a lot more versatility because they can be used with acrylics or oil paints. They last longer, they're easier to clean, and they're less expensive. And the added bonus is that they're cruelty-free. Acrylic or oil painters can select a bristle or a synthetic brush and use it throughout their entire painting. So as you move through your painting, the general rule is you're going to start to use a softer and a smaller brush. So for this middle stage of the painting, or what we like to call the modeling stage, I like to use a middle thickness synthetic brush. Sometimes these brushes are marketed as being for acrylics. Or a synthetic mongoose brush, which are nice because they're softer than the bristle brushes, but still give you enough texture, and they're a little bit harder than some of the brushes I might use for the detail stage. So for the detail stage, I like to use a soft, fine brush like a sable or a synthetic sable. So Kolinsky sables are seen as the highest quality brush for oil and watercolor. And of course, like all natural hair brushes, there are synthetic alternatives that offer you a very similar texture. So these are the main brush types I use, going from the underpainting big broad stages all the way to the very fine detailed stages where I'm unlikely to load a lot of paint onto my brush. But I wanted to talk about a few other brush types that lend themselves to special effects like blending. So the first of these is badger hair. Now badger is one of the oldest types of hair used for oil painting. The strands are pretty unique because they actually have this like bushy shape to them where they're thicker at the top. This makes them an excellent choice for things like fans or big blending brushes. Black sable is another hair type to note because they're ideal for blending and glazing in oils. They grow thicker and stronger than Kolinsky sables. Red sable is another hair type. They're more preferred for watercolor brushes, but they are also a cheaper alternative if you want a sable brush. Some people may also use squirrel brushes, which are good for very watery paint, so for things like washes. Also, goat hair is another one you might see as being used for blending. Now in conclusion, like I said before, you can get a bristle or a synthetic brush and use it for your whole painting. These other brush hair types are more for specific purposes or to do with your painting style. Synthetics generally stand up to the wear and tear of painting better than natural hair. Just watch that you reshape them with your fingers after you clean them. If you've ever tried to cut a Barbie's hair, you know that synthetic hair types don't always keep their shape quite as well. And generally speaking, brushes made for acrylics can be used for oil and watercolor, but natural brushes that are made for oil or watercolor shouldn't be used for acrylics, especially expensive sable brushes. I mean, technically, there's nothing to stop you from using any brush you want for anything, but it just means that if you use these brushes, they'll wear down a lot quicker. Also, both synthetic and natural hair will come in a big range of quality and construction. So obviously we're all on a budget, but you want to buy something that's better quality and look after it, and it'll be a better investment than buying a poor quality brush and not having it for as long. Also note that when you're buying particularly natural hair brushes, the price doesn't always indicate whether the brush is better or worse. It may be that the price is that way because the brushed hairs are harder to get or produce. Also, when you're buying a brush and you get a chance to view it in person, you might want to test it by just pushing it up against your palm and seeing where the bend of the paintbrush head is. You want that bend to be more in the center of the brush. That's a sign of a better quality brush. So speaking about natural hair brushes, obviously it comes from an animal and people will have their own feelings around that. So there are a few realities that come along with buying a natural hair paintbrush. And if you try to look into them online, it can actually be very hard to find the information you're looking for. But there do seem to be a few consistent facts that you probably want to be informed of before you purchase a brush and put your money behind it. So the first thing to think about is that a lot of these brushes come from countries that don't have a lot of animal protection laws or transparency around their industry practices. Also, a lot of these brushes come from animals that are being used in the fur industry for their pelts. So if you're uncomfortable with that and you don't wear animal fur, you may also want to avoid these brushes. Also, a lot of these brush hairs, like sable or badger, come from animals that don't thrive in captivity, and so they have to be killed for their hair. Also, if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, you may want to avoid hog hair brushes because they come from animals that are used for their meat. Also, it's hard to know the farming practices that were used. The good news is a lot of brush companies and art supply stores are putting more of a focus on cruelty-free and vegan brushes, as well as brushes that use more environmentally friendly or even sustainable materials. Overall, it seems like synthetic brushes are the environmental choice. But ultimately, they're still made of plastic, they will end in a landfill, so it's so key that you take care of your brushes and have them last as long as you can. So finally, I'm going to go over some of the brush shapes you can buy and what they're useful for. First, you have rounds, which are actually my favorite. They're also the only shape that was available to the old masters. They're really great for detail and very precise mark making. I like to have rounds in all sizes, but some artists will choose rounds for their more smaller, finely detailed brushes. Riggers, which are also called scripts or liners, actually come from people who used to paint boats with their long masts. They're very long, thin rounds, and they're used for fine, crisp details like strands of hair or even eyelashes. Not everyone will have this brush type, but it is ideal for those very long, thin lines. Because of the length of the brush, you can actually get a bit of room for shaky hand and still get a very smooth drag. Stipplers, or deerfoot stipplers, are very short, stubby rounds, and they're used for stipple texture or blurred edges. Again, this brush isn't a necessity, but landscape artists might find it useful for certain textures. Flats lay crisp strokes because they have a square edge, and they're great for solid shapes like roads or buildings. So if you are painting a lot of cityscapes, buildings, or even abstract paintings that have a lot of squares or hard edges, this is going to be the ideal shape for you. Brights are shorter flats, and they cover big areas of the canvas. They're great for adding in a big background. Because of the shorter length of their bristles, you can almost dig into the canvas a bit more. Filberts are both flat and round, so they fit all painting styles and probably are the most versatile brushes. So if you're looking for one brush type to buy, then you would probably want to go with Filberts. They're also favored by figurative artists, and you can really use each side of the brush differently. Cat tongues are a type of filbert. They have a triangular point at the top, rather than the domed, rounded top of a traditional filbert. Mops are another brush that you don't necessarily need to have in your set. They're bushy, rounded brushes, and they're ideal for very soft paint application, like for glazing, or maybe some varnishes, or even from blurring out or blending an area of oil paint. Egberts are longer filberts. They have an extra bounce, so they're used for artists who like very expressive brushwork. So if you're an abstract painter or someone with a very loose painterly style, these are ideal brushes. Fans are used to add specific textures by flicking or blending paint, so they're loved by landscape artists for things like grass, foliage, or clouds. As a figurative portrait artist, I've had a lot of fans that came from brush sets over the years that I've just never used, but recently I've discovered they have a great use for blending, especially in oil paints. Angles, including things like daggers or swords, which are just different shapes of angle brushes, they're ideal for single stroke painting, for leaves or long grasses, something where you can drag and create a very beautiful mark. You really can make do with just a range of sizes of, say, a filbert or a round brush in a synthetic or a bristle material, and you'll really be able to paint anything. So hopefully, if you're ever standing in an art store not knowing where to start, this gives you a little bit of an idea of what brush types you should be buying.